So I've been teaching guitar today, and I've just have a few things on my mind that I'd like to share. Um, I've been doing private lessons or giving private lessons for guitar, classical guitar, and mathematics, physics, and other stuff this year. Partly because it's extra money, but also because I think an important part of the process of mastery and learning is being able to teach and teach people well. And Richard Feynman, famous theoretical physicist that came up with quantum field theory, amongst others, he was also a brilliant polymath that worked on the Manhattan Project, and a crazy guy, great sense of humor, lots of antics, and a very, very powerful mind. He was a very good teacher, and he noted something very important, uh, which kind of changed academics' perspectives in regards to teaching uh, ever since. And his idea was that if you couldn't explain something to a student that was unfamiliar with the subject, then you didn't understand the concept well enough. And he notes in his biography or journals that part of his success and inspiration came from students asking him certain questions about things like spinning tops and angular momentum. And by thinking about those and thinking about the answers to give them, he really challenged his understanding of the fundamental physics behind them and thought, well, actually, some of these questions aren't so simple. And depending on how accurate an answer we want to get, uh, they can get very complicated very quickly. And so, in some ways, he acknowledges that his students inspired him to invent new physics or come up with solutions to things that no one had ever thought of before, because he really had to challenge his fundamental understanding of things in order to give an answer that was logically perfect or complete. And so that's the advantage of teaching, or the service of teaching. If you're trying to master something or you want to master something, you need to be able to test yourself in an environment where you can have a student with any type of question and you've got to be able to answer them. So it's not the same as going through a book and solving problems, because the book is inanimate and it doesn't continue to question things once you've given an answer. Whereas a student, if they don't get it or you haven't given a good enough explanation, they'll just keep asking. They'll keep building on the question, and you have to keep working till you hit a point where either you don't have an answer or you don't have an understanding that can continue the process, or the student is satisfied and the answers are complete for them. Now, both guitar and martial arts share a lot in common, uh, and they can be thought of through physical principles like the principle of least action, or I'm here taking an abstract concept and appropriating it for the purpose of didactic methods in uh, tutoring and guitar and things like martial arts or strength sports. And the founding principles for traditional martial arts like Kung Fu and Okinawan Go-Juru include this kind of dichotomy between the principle of least action and the principle of maximal economy. They aren't actually called these things, but I'm appropriating names from elsewhere because they suit what I'm about to explain. Now, economy is the study of the allocation of rare resources or limited resources. By limited resources, we can include things in the abstract sense like energy, time, uh, motivation, motivation in terms of action cost. And what I mean by that is that in order to do something, or to make yourself do something that you might not necessarily want to do, say like going to the gym and doing your workout, you need to attribute a mental resource to get you over psychological barrier in order to initiate that action and go do it. So that's what I mean by that, a motivation cost, because you only have a finite amount of that each day, or hypothetically, you only have a finite amount. And if you're an extremely motivated and inspired person, then you'll go through times where it seems like you've got an infinite amount of motivation. And then other times where you've got almost no motivation. So you have to be able to allocate that resource judiciously on a daily basis in order to continue progressing. So we have costs like that. Costs also like the amount of fatigue you're going to generate by playing the guitar. So the amount of left-hand fatigue that you're going to get through the finger muscles, the amount of fatigue that you're going to get through the shoulders and the upper back, the latissimus dorsi, when you're pulling the strings down and using the weight of gravity plus your posture to do 90% of the work for you. All of those are different types of costs that we can factor into the principle of maximal economy. And essentially, we want to get the best outcome possible using the resources that we have. So that's what I mean by maximal economy. So the outcome or the product might be the percentage of a song that we play perfectly or near perfectly or perfect enough up to some standard that we've set ourselves. That could be something that you can measure, one metric. Another metric could be how quickly you're able to play a song. So what tempo can you play it at? Say the tempo of the song is presto, so 160 beats per minute, for example. So very fast. You might be measuring the outcome as the percentage of that tempo that you're able to play at, and play at to a certain level of accuracy with a certain level of tone quality and clearness in the left hand and the right hand, etc., etc. Now, that's the economy side of things. If we're talking about martial arts, then we might be measuring outcomes like how quickly can you disable your opponent? How quickly can you kill your opponent? How quickly can you end the fight? Now, I don't advocate killing, but obviously, like, I'm just giving different examples of a measurement that someone might have to measure the effectiveness of what they're doing in their martial arts. In weightlifting, we might have something like okay, there's some very easy metrics in weightlifting. It's the amount of weight lifted to a certain standard of form and technique for a given exercise. So the amount of weight lifted, it might also be the speed or the minimum amount of time that it takes you to carry one heavy object like a yoke or a sandbag or farmer's handles or an atlas stone from one place to another. That's in strongman, etc., etc. So these are the kinds of metrics we can investigate in terms of economy. And in an academic setting, well, it might be, if it's literally a university exam or something like that, then you'll be having metrics like what percent do you get as a result of that assessment? Is it 100%? And if it's not 100%, how can we raise our standard to get as close to perfect as possible, etc. Although I don't necessarily agree with that as a kind of metric. For academics, I'd say true metrics are a bit more abstract, and it would come down to the depth of knowledge you have in something, plus your ability to solve problems and prove statements or assertions that you make or that you've seen to a certain standard or with a certain accuracy. Or you might even have an even more abstract metric, such as the serendipity in research and academia. Like, how many papers of original research can you publish in a year? That's a very contrived metric, and academics have a love-hate relationship with it because that's how they're measured. It's not necessarily a good metric, but it's one metric that they use. We might actually Try and measure things like the quality of the research that someone's able to do in a year. What is the quality of their ideas? How profound are they? What will they lead to in the future? Or what do they say about the state of the universe or the world as we know it, or the current body of knowledge? So these are the kinds of things we can measure in terms of the principle of maximal economy, and we can orient ourselves and the way that we play an instrument, the way that we lift a weight or carry an object, the way that we execute motion in a fight with an opponent in martial arts or the real world, and trying to maximize some type of measurable outcome is going to fall under the principle of maximal economy. Now, the flip side of that, which I've kind of mentioned in between indirectly, is the principle of least action. And that is, given a specific desired outcome, what's the least amount of effort or the least investment of resources I can make to get that outcome? So we kind of have these two competing things. We want to try and get the best outcome possible, or we want to get the best measure of some metric possible. And at the same time, we want to use the least amount of our resources to do so. Now, a big resource for everyone these days, especially in this era of human existence, this digital era, particularly with social media and other distractions, one of the most limited resources we have is time. In fact, I'd argue that this is true for any day and age, because time is finite for every living organism. You're only going to be alive for a certain number of years or seconds or minutes or millennia, etc. So your time is finite. It's the most precious resource that a living organism has. Apart from time, we have other resources like money, food, water. If we're out in space, it might be oxygen. It might be things like how many hours of social interaction, quality social interaction do we get in a day, etc., etc. Those are our resources, and very particularly in guitar, I think some good resources or metrics to keep track of are things like the amount of time you have to practice or learn a song, the amount of energy that you have to do so, and I don't just mean physical energy, I also mean mental energy, because when you're practicing well and you're doing something which is going to help you to play a song or write a song that is, that sounds very pleasing and has the best impact possible to your audience or to your own ears or whatever it is. You've got that, and you've also got something which is a bit harder to measure, things like if you're going to play for a certain amount of time, how sore are you going to be afterwards, and how long will it take for you to recover till you're near 100% again to practice the next time, etc. So that's a kind of recovery cost, and so that's another kind of resource that we have, which is not the same as energy, although it's related to energy. It's the cost to recover from a training session. Although for guitar, when you're young, like me, like you can play for 12 hours a day, and if you play well and you play with proper technique, then you're good to go the next day without any issues. Although I can't do that now because I haven't been practicing this year much at all, but I mean in general. So you've got that. You've got, I'd say energy in the sense of how long are you able to keep your fingers pressed down enough to get the notes sounding clear and to successfully get through a song. So how much energy do you have in your left hand? How much energy do you have in your right hand to play at a certain speed, to pluck all the notes accurately and clearly, etc., etc. So you can basically come up with your own metric for any of those things, and it could be measuring multiple things. But at the end of the day, you still want to maximize some quantity, some abstract quantity, and you also want to minimize the amount of resource that you've invested to achieve that outcome, or that amount of uh, abstract quantity that you want to get. So that's why the principle of maximal economy and principle of least action are two fundamentally important things when it comes to the learning process and skill acquisition in general. Uh, trying to understand and master those concepts specific to your field will, in the long term and even in the short term, save you an enormous amount of time, and you can get the best results for the amount of effort that you put in. And at the end of the day, no matter who you are, everyone kind of wants that. I mean, you could argue that enjoyment or fun is another factor. Maybe people just want to do things that are pleasing or are fun to them. Well, that's just another metric as well. And you could take fun or joy that you get from what you're doing as an outcome and find ways to maximize that, for example. So everything falls under these two principles: principle of least action and maximal economy. And if we keep these in mind while we're learning, while we're studying, while we're practicing, while we're training, we'll be able to get the most out of our time, which is the most precious resource that we have. And we'll also be able to get the most benefit, whatever that benefit is, from the time and the resources that we do invest. So that's why when I'm teaching guitar or tutoring people in mathematics and physics, etc., I try to teach around those principles, because at the end of the day, apart from a few other principles which I won't go into, those two are probably the most important for a person's development and progress. So hopefully this was helpful to someone. Maybe I just rambled for ages and didn't get anywhere, but that's okay. I think it's going to be helpful, at least for me, because in the future I can look at this and listen to myself and my arguments and then go, oh yeah, I had that thought at that time. And maybe my philosophy will change in the future. Maybe I'll be advocating something else, or I'll reject what I'm saying now. And that's cool too, because I'd like to see how I progress, both as an academic and as a musician, or even as a on vacation strength athlete. And I'd like to see how my mindset changes, and also how does my performance, or how does my performance, etc., change according to my mindset. So I don't know the answers to those questions. That's why I've recorded this.